Picture this: a bustling medieval town square, alive with the chatter of merchants and the clatter of hooves on cobblestones. But something is missing. No ticking, no chimes, no way to know the hour except by squinting at the sun's fleeting shadow or listening for the distant church bells. Time was a loose, uncertain thing, bending to the whims of nature and the uneven rhythms of human life. Then came the clock tower, a mechanical marvel that didn't just mark the hours but rewrote the very fabric of society. These towering giants didn't just tell time, they tamed it, turning chaos into order and reshaping everything from work to worship. Think about how often you glance at your phone or watch today. Time governs our lives with invisible precision. But in the Middle Ages, that precision was revolutionary. Before clock towers, towns ran on the uneven pulse of daylight, church bells, and the unreliable calls of town criers. Farmers rose with the dawn, markets opened when the sun was high, and curfews were guessed at best. Then, with the rise of mechanical clocks, time became something everyone could share, a collective heartbeat syncing entire communities. The clock tower wasn't just a machine, it was the world's first social network, connecting people across streets and seasons with its steady, unyielding rhythm. What made these structures so transformative wasn't just their gears and springs, it was the way they redefined human potential. For the first time, towns could coordinate on a scale never before imagined. Workers could labor by the hour, not just the sun. Markets could open and close with precision, and even religious rituals could align across cities. The clock tower became a symbol of progress, a promise that order could emerge from the randomness of daily life. But behind their grand faces and echoing chimes lies a story few know, one of ingenuity, power, and the quiet revolution that turned medieval towns into the cradle of modern life. So let's step into the shadow of these timeless giants and uncover how they didn't just tell time, they changed it forever. Before mechanical clocks, time was a dance with nature, unpredictable, uneven, and deeply personal. Farmers planted by the spring thaw, merchants opened stalls when the light was right, and travelers measured journeys by how many sunsets passed. But in the shadows of medieval monasteries, something extraordinary was taking shape. Monks, bound by strict prayer schedules, became the unlikely pioneers of precision timekeeping. Their lives revolved around the canonical hours, matins at midnight, lauds at dawn, vespers as the light faded, and missing these moments meant breaking a sacred rhythm. So they experimented, tinkering with weights and gears until they built the earliest mechanical clocks, devices that could slice the day into reliable, equal portions. These first clocks were far from perfect. They had no minute hands, often lost or gained hours, and required constant adjustment. But for monasteries, even this rough precision was revolutionary. Imagine the awe of hearing a bell ring at the exact same time each day, untouched by clouds or seasons. That reliability soon caught the attention of town leaders, who saw beyond prayer schedules to something greater, the promise of order. If clocks could synchronize monks, why not entire towns? By the late 14th century, towering public clocks began rising above city squares, their faces visible to all. Strasbourg's clock, built in 1354, didn't just tell time, it dazzled with moving figures of saints and planets, turning timekeeping into theatre. In London, the Great Clock of Westminster became so vital that tampering with it was punishable by death. These weren't just tools, they were symbols of a new truth, that time belonged to everyone, not just the heavens. Yet the shift wasn't smooth. Many resisted, clinging to the old ways. Laborers used to working from sunrise to sunset now faced strict hourly wages. Markets that once ebbed and flowed with daylight were forced into rigid schedules. Even the church hesitated, wary of sharing control over time with town councils. But the clock tower's steady tick was unstoppable. It reshaped laws, commerce, and daily routines, forging a world where time wasn't just observed, it was obeyed. The medieval clock tower didn't merely mark hours, it built the scaffolding of modern life, one measured moment at a time. Crafting a clock tower in the Middle Ages was like solving a puzzle with no instructions. Every piece had to be invented from scratch. Skilled blacksmiths forged intricate gears by hand, carpenters shaped massive wooden frames, and stonemasons carved towers that could withstand centuries of wind and rain. These weren't just functional machines, they were masterpieces of medieval engineering, where every cog and weight had to balance precision with brute strength. Take the St. Mark's Clock Tower in Venice, finished in 1499. Its gleaming blue and gold face didn't just tell time, it displayed the phases of the moon and the zodiac, a celestial ballet powered by gears so precise they rivaled the cosmos itself. But behind the beauty lay back-breaking labor. Building a clock tower demanded more than technical skill. It required a small army of specialists. Clockmakers, often secretive about their craft, designed mechanisms so delicate that a single misaligned gear could stop the entire system. Meanwhile, architects had to construct towers tall enough for the clock's chimes to echo across entire cities, yet stable enough to support tons of swinging weights. In Prague, the old town hall clock, built in 1410, became a marvel of collaboration. Its astronomical dial, showing everything from sun position to saints' days, was the work of mathematicians, artists, and engineers working in unison, a medieval think tank in action. What's astonishing is how these structures spread despite the odds. In smaller towns, communities pooled resources, trading barrels of wine or sacks of grain to fund their own towers. The clock at Wells Cathedral in England, built around 1390, was powered by a single massive weight, a 200-pound stone that descended slowly down a shaft, pulling the gears along. No electricity, no spare parts, just sheer ingenuity. And when towns couldn't afford metal, they improvised. Some rural clocks used wooden gears soaked in oil to prevent wear, proving that even humble materials could conquer time. Yet clock towers were never just about mechanics. They became canvases for civic pride, their faces adorned with religious symbols, royal crests, or local folklore. In Bern, Switzerland, the Zittlog clock tower featured a parade of dancing bears, a nod to the city's emblem. These details weren't frivolous, they declared a town's identity to the world. To have a clock tower meant you were important enough to master time itself, and that's why so many still stand today, not as relics, but as proof of what happens when human ambition and craftsmanship collide. Every tick of their hands was a declaration. Progress isn't just possible, it's built to last. Imagine living in a world where the time in your town could be completely different from the village just a few miles away. That was the reality before clock towers. Without a shared measure of time, every community ran on its own rhythm, guided by the sun, the church bells, or the mayor's best guess. A market might open at dawn in one town but mid-morning in another, and travelers could never be sure when to arrive. This patchwork of local time wasn't just inconvenient, it held back trade, confused travelers, and kept towns isolated in their own little bubbles of chaos. Then came the clock tower, standing tall in the town square like a silent conductor, waving its hands to keep everyone in step. Suddenly, time wasn't just personal, it was public, precise, and universal. Towns that once ignored each other's rhythms now synchronized their days down to the hour. Bakers kneaded dough at the same time, blacksmiths hammered in unison, and merchants rolled open their stalls together, knowing customers would arrive when expected. This wasn't just about convenience, it was the birth of a shared tempo that bound communities tighter than ever before. The impact rippled far beyond commerce. For the first time, entire regions could coordinate events, from legal proceedings to religious festivals, without confusion. If a town crier announced a decree at noon, people knew exactly when to gather. Church bells, once rung whenever the local priest felt inspired, now chimed in harmony with neighboring parishes. Even the law-adapted contracts began specifying exact hours instead of vague terms like by sundown, reducing disputes and fostering trust. But perhaps the most surprising change was psychological. Seeing that clock face high above the square sent a powerful message: time belonged to everyone. Rich or poor, merchant or farmer, the hours treated all equally. This shared rhythm fostered a sense of collective identity, turning scattered towns into interconnected hubs of progress. Clocktower didn't just tell time, it taught people to live by it, weaving order from chaos one steady tick at a time. Before clock towers, trade was a gamble. A merchant might wait days for a shipment to arrive, never knowing if delays came from bad weather or a lazy cart driver. Workers bargained for whole days of labor, not hours, leaving employers guessing how much they'd owe. Markets opened and closed like flowers chasing the sun, unpredictable and fleeting. But when mechanical timekeepers rose above town squares, commerce didn't just improve, it transformed. Suddenly, a baker could promise fresh bread by the third hour. A wool merchant could schedule shipments to arrive before the weekly fair, and a blacksmith could charge not by the piece but by the hour. Time became a currency as valuable as silver. Consider the simple innovation of hourly wages. Before clocks, most laborers were paid for tasks threshing a field, weaving a bolt of cloth, with no standard for how long work should take. But with clock towers, employers could measure effort in precise increments. A mason might earn 12 pennies for 6 hours of work instead of haggling over each stone laid. This shift didn't just make payroll fairer, it supercharged productivity. Workers raced to finish tasks within set hours, knowing extra effort meant extra pay. Meanwhile, guilds used these fixed hours to protect their members, setting minimum wages for apprentices and masters alike. The clock tower didn't just track time, it created the very idea of a workday. Long-distance trade flourished under this new rhythm. A merchant in Bruges could now promise a partner in Venice that goods would leave on the first Monday of each month, arrive by the 20th, and payments would follow within 30 days. Such precision was revolutionary. Contracts, once vague promises sealed with handshakes, now bristled with terms like "by noon on the feast of St. Michael" or "within 2 hours of the market bell." Banks flourished as lenders could calculate interest down to the day, and debtors could no longer argue about due dates. The Riccardi of Florence, medieval Europe's powerhouse bankers, owed much of their success to clock towers. Their ledgers meticulously tracked loans to kings and popes by the hour, not the season. Even markets evolved. In places like Frankfurt and Lyon, trading windows shrank from dawn to dusk free-for-alls to tightly scheduled bursts of activity. The famous champagne fairs, where merchants from across Europe gathered, operated on strict timetables. Wool sellers had from 9 to 11, spice dealers from 11 to 1, and no one dared oversleep. Missing your slot meant losing a year's profits. This regimentation didn't stifle trade, it turbocharged it. With everyone playing by the same clock, deals moved faster, trust grew stronger, and the sheer volume of goods exchanged exploded. But the clock tower's greatest economic gift was something subtler: the ability to plan. Farmers could time planting to match distant market days, knowing how long it took carts to reach the city. Craftsmen could juggle multiple orders, confident in their deadlines. Towns even scheduled tax collections and tolls by the clock, ending the old chaos of arbitrary demands. This predictability turned local economies into intricate, interlocking systems, the ancestors of modern supply chains. The medieval marketplace didn't just get more efficient, it got smarter, all because a tower in the square kept everyone honest about the hour. And that honesty, that shared trust in time, became the invisible foundation of capitalism itself. Long before clock towers dominated town squares, the rhythm of medieval life pulsed to the beat of church bells. Monasteries had been the keepers of time for centuries, their bells dividing the day into the 8 canonical hours, from matins in the dead of night to complline as darkness fell. These sacred intervals weren't just markers for prayer, they were the scaffolding of daily life, telling farmers when to rest, markets when to close, and families when to gather. So when mechanical clocks arrived, it was only natural that the church saw them as divine tools, gifts from God to perfect the ancient rhythm of devotion. The earliest public clocks didn't just tell time, they preached. Take the monumental clock at Salisbury Cathedral, installed in 1386. Its face displayed not just hours but saints' days and feast cycles, turning timekeeping into a visual sermon. In Prague, the astronomical clock's hourly show featured apostles parading past statues of the 12 apostles, blending celestial mechanics with sacred theater. These weren't mere machines, they were mechanical priests, reminding every passerby that time itself belonged to God. Yet as clock towers spread, something unexpected happened. Town councils began wresting control from the clergy, commissioning clocks that rang not for vespers but for market openings, curfews, and civic announcements. In 14th century Italy, cities like Padua and Verona installed clocks on secular buildings, their faces adorned with civic crests instead of crosses. The message was clear: time was no longer just a spiritual commodity, it was a political one. Tensions flared. In Rouen, France, church officials demanded the right to regulate the town clock's bells, insisting they alone could call the faithful to prayer. In London, the mayor and bishop clashed over who controlled the chimes of St. Paul's, a battle that spilled into the courts. Even the design of clock faces became a battleground. Ecclesiastical clocks often featured religious motifs like the Last Judgment or Virgin Mary, while civic versions boasted coats of arms or mythological figures. The struggle reflected a deeper shift. Time was slipping from the church's grasp. As merchants and magistrates embraced mechanical precision, the old canonical hours began to feel outdated. Why pray at Terce when the wool market opened at 9? Why heed compline if the town guard changed shifts at 8? The church fought back, decreeing that clocks in cathedral squares must still strike the canonical hours, but increasingly, those chimes competed with the secular rhythms of commerce and law. By the 15th century, a compromise emerged. Many town clocks struck twice, once for the canonical hours, once for civic time. In Bern, the Zitloges bells rang for both matins and market, a delicate dance between heaven and earth. This duality shaped medieval society in profound ways. Workers now lived in two worlds, answering to the factory whistle and the Angelus bell, to profit and piety. The clock tower had become a mediator between sacred and secular, its hands stretching across the fault lines of a changing world. What began as a monastic tool to glorify God ended up empowering the very forces that would challenge the church's dominance. The clock tower didn't just mark time, it exposed the tension between eternal truths and human progress, a conflict that would echo through the Reformation and beyond. In its gears and chimes, we hear the first ticking of modernity, a rhythm neither fully sacred nor wholly secular, but forever changed by the collision of both. The relentless chime of the clock tower didn't just mark the hours, it rewrote the rules of human behavior. Imagine a world where showing up, when the sun was high, had been good enough for generations, only to wake up one day to fines for tardiness, locked gates at missed curfews, and public shaming for those who dared ignore the bell. Punctuality, once an afterthought, became a moral obligation, enforced with the same gravity as paying taxes or attending church. The clock tower's unyielding rhythm didn't just organize society, it disciplined it, turning time into a tool of control that reshaped everything from education to crime. Take the medieval workplace where the concept of on time barely existed before clocks. A blacksmith might arrive at his forge when the rooster crowed, take breaks when he pleased, and leave once his arms ached. But with clock towers looming overhead, guilds began imposing strict work hours 7 to 12, then 1 to 6, with penalties for latecomers. In textile towns like Ghent, weavers find apprentices for every quarter hour they dawdled after the morning bell. Employers, once at the mercy of daylight, now docked wages for lost time, a phrase that entered the lexicon as sharply as the clock's blade sliced through old habits. Even meal breaks became regimented. Records from 15th century Frankfurt show taverns serving workers lunches in shifts, timed to the minute. Schools mirrored this rigidity. Medieval universities had once let scholars debate deep into the night, but now lectures started precisely at 8, with tardy students barred at the door. At Oxford, the college clock's toll dictated not just classes but study periods, meals, and even bedtime, a far cry from the fluid rhythms of candlelit manuscript copying. Parents drilled this new discipline into children with moral tales warning that the clock waits for no sluggard. A Nuremberg schoolmaster's diary from 1420 recounts how he made latecomers kneel on peas until the next bell, a punishment unthinkable in the days when time flowed like water. But nowhere was the clock's grip tighter than in the realm of law and order. Curfews, once loosely tied to sunset, now slammed shut at exact hours 9 p.m. In winter, 10 in summer, with watchmen locking gates to the minute. In Italian city-states like Florence, laws punished drunkards found outside after curfew twice as harshly if they were caught in the hour after the final bell, proving time itself could amplify guilt. Prisons adopted work schedules, with inmates grinding grain or spinning wool in shifts measured by the tower's chimes. Even executions, once public spectacles timed for maximum attendance, became grimly efficient affairs, with condemned men led to the scaffold at the stroke of 11, as if death itself bowed to the clock. This obsession with punctuality didn't just change routines, it altered mindsets. Diaries from the era reveal a new anxiety about wasting time, a phrase that scarcely existed before clocks. The wealthy carried portable sundials, while towns installed subsidiary clocks in markets and guild halls, ensuring no one could claim ignorance. Resistance flared, of course. Folk songs mocked the tyrant clock, and rebellions in Flemish mills targeted timekeepers first, smashing gears to reclaim the old freedom of flexible labor. But the tide was unstoppable. By the 15th century, chroniclers wrote of people living by the clock with the same awe once reserved for saints' miracles. What began as a mechanical convenience had become a social revolution, one that echoes in our modern obsession with schedules and deadlines. The medieval clock tower didn't just tell time, it taught humanity to obey it, weaving discipline into the fabric of daily life so thoroughly that we barely notice its grip today. Every time you glance at your watch or rush to meet a deadline, you're hearing the distant echo of those first, authoritative chimes, the sound of order conquering chaos, one measured moment at a time. In the fierce rivalry between medieval cities, the clock tower became more than a timekeeper. It was a towering declaration of dominance, a stone and gear proclamation screaming, "We matter." When the Duke of Burgundy commissioned the astronomical clock of Dijon in 1480, he didn't just want to tell time. He wanted to outshine neighboring rulers, embedding the mechanism with golden fleurs de lis and a mechanical rooster that crowed at noon. Over in Prague, King Charles IV ordered his clockmakers to craft an astronomical marvel so complex that legends claimed its designer was blinded to prevent him from replicating it elsewhere. These weren't just engineering feats, they were power plays, stone billboards advertising a city's wealth and ingenuity to allies and enemies alike. The obsession with height said it all. In Siena, the Torre del Mangia soared 300 feet, a deliberate finger pointing skyward, taller than even the cathedral's bell tower. Why? Because in the Middle Ages, elevation equaled elevation. The higher your clock, the farther its chimes carried. The more villagers could hear your authority echoing across the hills. Wealthy merchant cities like Lübeck and Bruges turned their clock towers into canvases, carving facades with scenes of local saints and mythical beasts, as if to say, our legends are so grand they deserve to mark the hours. Even the automata, those whimsical dancing figures that delighted crowds, served a purpose. When the Strasbourg clock's rooster flapped its wings and crowed at noon, it wasn't just a spectacle. It was a reminder that this city could make metal mimic life itself, a flex of technological prowess. But the real genius lay in the details. Coats of arms chiseled above clock faces declared ownership louder than any herald. In Ghent, the belfry's dragon weather vane wasn't just decorative, it was the city's symbol, a warning to outsiders that this town guarded its time and its taxes fiercely. Some towers even bore inscriptions taunting rivals. The clock at Wells Cathedral included a Latin verse roughly translating to, I count the hours for all, but favor none, a thinly veiled jab at neighboring towns still relying on sundials. For ordinary citizens, these towers were daily reminders of who held the reins. When the Venetian clock tower displayed not just the time but the phases of the moon and zodiac signs, it wasn't for sailors' convenience, it was to showcase Venice's mastery over both earth and heavens. And when feudal lords like the Visconti of Milan installed clocks on their castles, they weren't telling time, they were telling subjects, even your mornings belong to us. The message was clear, control the clock and you control the rhythm of life itself. Yet this competition had an unexpected upside. It accelerated innovation. To outdo Strasbourg's celestial clock, Bern's engineers added a parade of bears. Augsburg's tower featured a mechanical jousting tournament, while Prague's apostles spun past a skeletal figure of death nodding ominously. Each new marvel pushed artisans to greater heights, blending art, science, and propaganda into a single mechanism. The clock tower race didn't just tell time, it kick-started a technological arms race, proving that even in the Middle Ages, nothing spurred progress quite like the burning desire to show off. The first mechanical clock towers didn't spread across Europe like wildfire, they crept from town to town, adapting to each region's quirks like a language changing its dialect. It all began in northern Italy, where bustling city-states like Milan and Venice craved precision to manage their thriving trade networks. Their clock towers were marvels of efficiency, with faces that displayed not just hours but tied charts for merchants and lunar phases for sailors. Yet cross the Alps into Germany and you'd find a different obsession. In cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg, clockmakers competed to create the most elaborate automata dancing jesters, roaring lions, even entire biblical scenes that sprang to life with each chime. These weren't just timekeepers, they were mechanical theaters, proving a city's wealth and creativity to every visitor. England took yet another path. Here, clock towers leaned into civic duty rather than spectacle. The tower at Wells Cathedral, built in the late 1400s, kept its design starkly functional. No zodiacs or dancing bears, just a clear, bold face visible to farmers tilling distant fields. Why the difference? English towns valued punctuality for practical reasons, coordinating harvests, timing court sessions, and ensuring fair wages. Even the famous Big Ben's ancestor, the medieval clock at Westminster, prioritized reliability over flair, its bells ringing with the steady cadence of bureaucracy at work. But perhaps the most surprising adaptations happened in Eastern Europe. In Prague, King Charles IV commissioned an astronomical clock so intricate it displayed everything from planetary positions to saints' days, a fusion of science and faith. Meanwhile, Polish clock towers often doubled as defensive structures, their thick walls sheltering townsfolk during raids. The clock in Krakow's Cloth Hall even featured a trumpet call on the hour, a tradition born from the watchman's duty to warn of fires or invaders. What united these diverse designs wasn't their appearance but their purpose. Whether adorned with golden angels or bare as a barracks, every clock tower served as the heartbeat of its community. In Spain, Moorish influences crept into tower designs, with intricate geometric patterns framing the clock faces. In Flanders, guilds funded towers that chimed different melodies for wool traders versus fishmongers. This regional diversity proves something profound. Medieval Europeans didn't just adopt clock towers, they reinvented them, weaving local identity into every gear and chime. The technology might have been universal, but its soul was always hometown. Peering inside a medieval clock tower was like uncovering a mechanical symphony, each gear, weight, and escapement playing its part in perfect harmony. At the heart of these early timekeepers was the Verge escapement, a simple yet revolutionary device that transformed raw energy into measured motion. Picture this, a vertical rod with two small pallets that alternately caught and released a toothed crown wheel, allowing the clock's gears to advance in steady, controlled ticks. This ingenious mechanism, often no larger than a human hand, was the unsung hero behind every public clock's reliable rhythm. Yet for all its brilliance, it had quirks. Without minute hands or precise calibration, these clocks could drift by 15 minutes a day, a flaw that would horrify modern engineers but was nothing short of miraculous in an era when sundials and water clocks ruled. What powered these mechanical beasts? Not electricity, not steam, but gravity itself. Massive stone weights, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds, hung from ropes wound around wooden drums. As the weights slowly descended, they turned the drums, driving the gear train forward. In Wells Cathedral, the original 14th century clock used a single weight that took 32 hours to drop its full length, requiring monks to winch it back up twice daily, a ritual as regular as prayer. But the real challenge was keeping that power consistent. Early clockmakers discovered that weights alone couldn't prevent the clock from speeding up as the weight fell faster. Their solution, the foliate, a horizontal bar with adjustable weights that oscillated side to side, acting as a primitive pendulum to regulate speed. It wasn't perfect, but it tamed the wild energy of falling stones into something resembling order. The materials themselves were a testament to medieval ingenuity. Craftsmen forged gears from iron, hand-filing each tooth to mesh seamlessly with its neighbor. In places where metal was scarce, like rural Switzerland, clockmakers carved gears from hardwood, soaking them in linseed oil to reduce friction. The Great Clock of Rouen even used whalebone for its foliate springs, a material flexible enough to bend yet strong enough to withstand decades of constant motion. And then there were the bearings, often just polished stones or bronze plates greased with animal fat, reducing wear on spinning axles. Every component had to endure brutal winters, scorching summers, and the constant vibration of tolling bells, all without the precision tools we take for granted today. Perhaps the most astonishing feat was synchronization. Tower clocks didn't exist in isolation. they often drove secondary mechanisms like astronomical displays or automated figures. The Strasbourg clock, completed in 1354, connected its timekeeping gears to a rotating calendar of feast days, a miniature planetarium showing lunar phases, and even a mechanical rooster that flapped its wings and crowed at noon. Making these features work in unison required a level of coordination akin to conducting an orchestra blindfolded. Clockmakers achieved this through an intricate system of auxiliary gears and shafts, each carefully calculated to turn at just the right ratio. One miscalculation, and the rooster might crow at midnight while the moon phase stuck in perpetual full. Yet for all their complexity, these clocks were designed to be repaired by people who'd never seen a blueprint. Marks carved into gears indicated alignment points, while colored stones embedded in frames served as medieval error codes to help troubleshoot jams. In the Prague astronomical clock, built in 1410, the original maker left behind a manual in verse, a rhyming guide to maintenance that doubled as a proud craftsman's signature. These weren't just machines, they were living collaborations between maker and maintainer, meant to outlast their creators by centuries. The true marvel isn't that medieval clocks kept imperfect time, it's that they kept time at all. Each tower was a cathedral of precision built with hammers and chisels, a triumph of intuition over calculation. When we stand beneath their ancient faces today, we're not just seeing time measured, we're witnessing humanity's first tentative steps toward mastering the invisible forces that govern our lives. Those early craftsmen didn't just build clocks, they built the very idea of precision, one painstaking gear at a time. For centuries, time flowed like a river, personal, unpredictable, bending to individual needs and natural cycles. A farmer rose with the first light, a baker pulled bread from the oven when it smelled right, and families gathered for meals not by the hour but when hunger struck. This was private time, intimate and elastic, woven into the fabric of daily life like the uneven stitches of a handmade cloak. Then came the clock tower, its chimes slicing through the air like a blade, carving the day into uniform portions that belonged not to individuals but to the collective. Suddenly, time wasn't just something you experienced, it was something you answered to. The transition wasn't gentle. Imagine a world where meeting at dawn had once meant whenever the sky pinkened, now dictated by a clock's iron hands pointing precisely to 6:15. Villagers who had always paused to chat in the square found themselves scolded for lingering past the 7th chime. Even the simple act of eating shifted where families had once shared meals at irregular intervals. Towns now synchronized supper to the clock tower's call, with inns serving dinner at 5 sharp and stragglers left with cold stew. This wasn't just a change in routine, it was a seismic shift in how people related to time itself. The clock tower turned hours from a personal experience into a public commodity, something to be spent, wasted, or hoarded like grain before winter. Work transformed most dramatically. Medieval artisans, used to laboring until a task was done, now faced the tyranny of the hourly wage. Guild ledgers from 15th century Ghent reveal masters docking pay for minutes lost to a broken tool or a thirsty apprentice. In textile workshops, the once common practice of St. Monday, taking the day off to recover from Sunday's revelry, clashed violently with clock-driven schedules. Factory owners posted overseers to watch for tardy workers, while town councils fined merchants who opened stalls late. Time became a currency more rigid than coin, and those who couldn't keep pace found themselves impoverished in ways they barely understood. Yet the clock's reach extended far beyond the marketplace. Leisure, once a fluid escape from toil, now had borders. In German towns, beer gardens posted opening hours aligned with the tower's bells, while in England, archery practice, once a casual pastime, was strictly scheduled by law to ensure all citizens trained at the same time. Even childhood changed. Diaries from the era show parents scolding children for losing time in play, a phrase that would have baffled earlier generations. The very concept of free time emerged as a defined slice of the day, something to be scheduled between work and sleep rather than an organic part of life's rhythm. Perhaps the most profound change was psychological. As clock towers proliferated, people began internalizing their relentless tick. Personal letters from the late Middle Ages reveal a new anxiety about missed moments and unused hours. Sermons warned against sloth with unprecedented urgency, framing punctuality as a moral virtue. In Florence, merchants adopted the phrase, "Time is money," centuries before Benjamin Franklin made it famous, while in Bruges, tapestries depicted Father Time not as a gentle elder but as a stern judge with an hourglass and sword. The clock tower hadn't just reshaped schedules, it had rewired minds, planting the seed of our modern guilt over unproductive days. Resistance simmered, of course. Folk tales from the era brim with sly foxes outwitting clockmakers or peasants tricking town guards into ringing bells early. In York, rebellious apprentices famously tied the clock's hands backward to extend a festival, while Flemish weavers smashed tower mechanisms to reclaim their flexible work rhythms. But the tide was unstoppable. By the 16th century, even critics had adopted the language of clocks, complaining about wasted time, even as they cursed its tyranny. The great irony: the very device meant to bring order had created a new kind of chaos, the frantic race against the clock that still defines our lives today. The medieval tower didn't just tell time, it taught us to fear it, turning what was once a natural flow into a countdown we're all scrambling to beat. The placement of a medieval clock tower was never accidental, it was a deliberate act of urban choreography, positioning time itself at the heart of daily life. Picture the ideal spot, elevated enough for the bells to carry across rooftops, central enough for merchants and magistrates alike to glance up at its face, and towering over the busiest crossroads where foot traffic converged. This wasn't just about convenience, it was about control. By anchoring clock towers to market squares or town halls, medieval planners didn't just tell time, they dictated the rhythm of commerce, governance, and even social gatherings. Take the Piazza del Campo in Siena, where the Torre del Mangia rises like a stone sentinel above the fan-shaped square. Its placement was strategic genius. From this single vantage point, the clock's face could be seen by wool traders haggling below, judges presiding over courts in the Palazzo Pubblico, and farmers unloading grain in adjacent alleys. The tower didn't just dominate the skyline, it became the literal pivot around which the city turned. Similarly, in Bruges, the belfry's clock loomed over the marketplace, its chimes synchronizing the opening of stalls, the changing of guards, and the start of public executions. Every ding of the bell reinforced a simple message. Here, in this space, time belongs to the collective. But clock towers did more than occupy space, they shaped it. As towns expanded, new streets often radiated outward from the tower's base, ensuring its visibility remained uninterrupted. In Nuremberg, the Schöner Brunnen clock tower became the focal point of concentric rings of development, with narrower lanes designed to funnel sound toward residential quarters. Architects even accounted for acoustics. The octagonal towers common in Flanders weren't just aesthetic, their flat surfaces projected chimes farther than round designs. Some towns, like Lübeck, went further, legally prohibiting buildings that might block sightlines to the clock face. The result, a visual and auditory web that bound every citizen to the same schedule. The symbolism of placement ran deep. When London's Great Clock of Westminster was installed near Parliament in the 14th century, it wasn't just telling time. it was declaring that even lawmakers answered to a higher order. In Italian city-states, clocks mounted on civic buildings like Florence's Palazzo Vecchio sent a clear signal. Timekeeping was no longer the church's domain but a tool of secular authority. Even the materials spoke volumes. Towers built with locally quarried stone, like the red sandstone of Strasbourg's clock, tied the mechanism to regional identity, while guild-funded clocks in Ghent bore crests of the merchant groups who paid for them, turning time into a badge of civic pride. Yet the most fascinating impact was psychological. By centering clock towers in public spaces, medieval planners ensured timekeeping became a shared ritual. The daily crowd gathering to hear the noon chime, the market vendors synchronizing their transactions to the hour, these weren't just practical acts but performances of communal identity. The clock tower's shadow stretching across the square at dusk wasn't just a marker of evening. It was a reminder that every individual, from beggar to baron, moved through the same measured day. In an era before street names or house numbers, the clock tower became the ultimate landmark, a fixed point in both space and time, around which entire cities learned to orbit. The deep, resonant toll of a clock tower bell didn't just mark the hour, it stirred souls. These weren't mere sounds, they were emotional lifelines vibrating through cobblestone streets and into the marrow of daily life. When the bell rang at dawn, it wasn't just a wake-up call, it was a collective inhale pulling the town into another day. At noon, its chimes paused conversations mid-sentence, a reminder that even in chaos, time marched on. And when it sounded at dusk, it wasn't just curfew. It was a lullaby for the entire community, tucking laborers into rest. But these bells did more than schedule. They spoke a language everyone understood, weaving joy, fear, and grief into the very air. Consider how a single peal could shift a town's mood. The rapid, frantic ringing of the tocsin bell sent farmers dropping plows and merchants abandoning stalls fire or invaders were near. In contrast, the slow, mournful toll for a funeral made entire streets fall silent. Hats clutched to chests as the sound washed over them. And then there were the celebratory peals, wedding bells layered with the clanging of pots and pans, as if the whole town was cheering the couple on. In 14th century Ghent, records show the city paid extra bell ringers during festivals, ensuring the sound was so thunderous it could be heard in neighboring villages. This wasn't just noise, it was a declaration: we are together in this moment. The social power of bells was so profound that their misuse could spark riots. In 1382, a London mob stormed the belfry after a clerk accidentally rang the alarm bell during a peaceful Sunday, mistaking it for a call to arms. Similarly, French peasants in Rouen revolted when the local lord commandeered the church bells to summon workers to his fields, robbing them of their sacred signals for prayer. Bells were the people's telegraph, their social media, their emergency broadcast system, and tampering with them was like cutting a town's vocal cords. Yet beyond crises and celebrations, bells performed quieter miracles. They synchronized routines in an era before wristwatches, turning isolated lives into a shared rhythm. The miller knew to start grinding when the third morning bell echoed. Schoolchildren raced home at the bread bell, signaling bakeries had fresh loaves. Even the sick relied on them. Hospitals in medieval Florence timed medicine doses to the clock tower's hourly chime. This auditory network created an invisible safety net. If the bells fell silent, people sensed something was wrong before they could articulate why. Perhaps most remarkably, bells blurred class lines. A nobleman and a beggar heard the same chimes, felt the same urgency in their bones. When the plague struck, it was the death bell that united rich and poor in shared dread. During harvests, the gleaning bell told laborers when they could collect leftover grain from fields, a rare moment when the clock tower's voice tipped power toward the powerless. Bells didn't just mark time, they mediated humanity, reminding everyone from king to cobbler that some forces were beyond any individual's control. The echo of these chimes lingers today. Modern sirens, school bells, and even smartphone alerts owe their existence to that medieval innovation. Sound as social glue. Next time you hear a clock tower bell, whether in a historic square or a movie scene, listen closely. Beneath the bronze resonance, you'll hear the heartbeat of a community that knew time wasn't just measured in hours, but in shared breaths, collective fears, and the unshakable truth that no one truly faces the day alone. Before clock towers, work followed the sun's arc. A blacksmith might hammer until his arms ached. A weaver's loom fell silent when twilight blurred the threads. Labor was measured in tasks completed, not hours logged. But as mechanical time spread through medieval towns, something radical took hold. The idea that work could be sliced into uniform portions, bought and sold like bolts of cloth. Guild ledgers from 15th century Bruges tell the tale, entries shifting from payment for one chest to 12 pence for 6 hours of labor. This wasn't just bookkeeping, it was a revolution in human effort, turning time itself into currency. The change hit hardest in textile towns. In Ghent, where wool was king, weavers' apprentices once worked at their master's pace, breaking for meals when hunger struck, leaving when the last skein was dyed. But with clock towers looming overhead, guilds imposed strict shifts, 6 hours before noon, 6 after, with fines for latecomers. Suddenly, the value of a worker wasn't just their skill, but their punctuality. A ledger from 1482 records a young dyer docked half a day's wages for arriving after the third bell, a phrase that would have baffled his grandfather. Resistance flared. In York, angry fullers smashed a clock's gears, shouting they'd not be yoked like oxen to a sundial. Bakers faced their own turmoil. Where once they pulled loaves from the oven when the crust gleamed gold, now town laws demanded bread ready by the 6th hour, leading to underbaked batches and furious customers. London's archives preserve a petition from bakers begging to work by the dough's readiness, not the tower's tyranny, but merchants loved the predictability. A fishmonger could now promise herring fresh by 9, a tanner guarantee hides by Thursday noon. This reliability birthed something unprecedented, the reliable work schedule, where wages and hours entwined like gears in the very clocks that dictated them. Yet the clock's grip tightened unevenly. While urban craftsmen chafed under hourly demands, rural life clung to the old rhythms. A farmer in Normandy might still plant when the oak leaves unfurl, his wife churning butter until her arms tired. This divide birthed two worlds, one racing against the clock, the other moving to nature's pulse, a tension that echoes in today's clashes between flexible remote work and rigid office hours. The most explosive conflicts erupted in mining towns. Silver miners in Saxony, accustomed to descending at dawn and surfacing when their lamps guttered, revolted when owners installed shift bells underground. In 1491, a riot erupted at the Schneeberg mines after overseers used the new clocks to extend shifts without extra pay. The miners' chant, "No chain on the sun," became a rallying cry against time's monetization. Their rebellion foreshadowed modern labor movements, proving that the fight for fair wages began not with factories, but with the first clock tower's chime. What emerged from these struggles was a new social contract. Workers traded flexibility for predictability. Masters gained control but faced demands for overtime pay. In Augsburg, clockmakers even designed special labor clocks with dual faces, one for the master's count, one for the worker's tally, to prevent disputes. This uneasy compromise laid the groundwork for everything from the 8-hour day to punch clocks. the medieval work shift didn't just change how people labored, it redefined what work was worth, planting the seed for our very notion of a fair wage. Every time you glance at your pay stub or check the clock at quitting time, you're hearing the distant echo of those first, contentious bells, the sound of time becoming money. Before clock towers reshaped education, learning flowed like a meandering river. Scholars debated until their voices grew hoarse. Lectures stretched as long as the daylight allowed, and students memorized texts by the flicker of candlelight without a thought for the hour. Then came the clock's relentless chime, slicing the academic day into orderly portions. At the University of Paris, founded in the 12th century, the shift was seismic. Professors who once taught until the text was exhausted now faced strict schedules: grammar at 7, rhetoric at 9, theology afternoon, with tardy students barred from entering once the bell tolled. This wasn't just about punctuality. It was the birth of modern classroom discipline, where time became as much a teacher as the masters themselves. The transformation rippled down to cathedral schools and guild apprenticeships. In Oxford's Merton College, a ledger from 1392 details fines for scholars who lingered past the second bell between lectures. Young scribes, once free to practice penmanship at their own pace, now copied manuscripts in timed sessions, their progress measured by the tower's shadow crawling across parchment. Even meal times became regimented, a stark contrast to the old tradition of breaking bread when hunger struck. At Bologna's law school, students revolted when administrators replaced the flexible meal bell with fixed dining hours, arguing that digestion couldn't be rushed by machinery. Yet the clock's most profound gift to education was hidden in plain sight: the syllabus. Before standardized hours, teachers jumped between topics haphazardly, revisiting old material whenever gaps in understanding appeared. With clocks dictating 50-minute intervals, a length chosen because medieval scholars believed it matched the average attention span, subjects were divided into digestible chunks. A 14th century Cambridge curriculum shows astronomy Mondays from 9 to 10, arithmetic Tuesdays at the same hour, creating predictable rhythms that helped knowledge stick. This innovation didn't just organize learning, it revolutionized retention, turning education from a marathon into a relay race where each baton was passed precisely on schedule. The echoes of this system still ring in every school today. When a modern classroom bell cuts off a lesson mid-sentence, it's repeating a 700-year-old ritual born from those first university clocks. Even the word period for a class segment traces back to medieval timekeeping, a division of the day into equal periody. Yet for all its benefits, the clock's rule wasn't universally welcomed. Some scholars, like the fiery theologian John Wycliffe, railed against mechanical minds that valued punctuality over deep thought. In Prague, students staged silent hours where they'd cover the university clock with cloaks, reclaiming the right to debate until ideas were fully explored rather than abandoned at the bell's command. What emerged was a delicate balance, one we still navigate today. The clock brought structure that made education scalable, allowing schools to teach more students with fewer masters. But it also risked prioritizing speed over understanding, a tension every teacher knows when the bell interrupts an aha moment. Perhaps that's why the most enduring medieval classrooms were those that embraced both worlds: clocks on the walls to mark the hours, but wisdom in the air that refused to be contained by them. The true lesson of those early university towers wasn't just how to tell time, it was learning when to let time go. Rising above the rooftops with their commanding views, clock towers became medieval towns' first line of defense, far more than just timekeepers. Watchmen perched in their upper galleries could spot approaching armies or raiding parties from miles away, their elevated sight lines stretching across farmlands and forests. In coastal cities like Genoa, the tower's keeper scanned the horizon not just for the sun's position but for pirate sails, ready to trigger a rapid bell sequence that sent fishermen scrambling to harbor and militia rushing to the walls. This dual purpose turned clock towers into nerve centers of security, where the same mechanism that marked peaceful hours could instantly switch to sounding the alarm. Some towers took defense even further, built with fortifications worthy of a castle. The Torre del Mangia in Siena, completed in 1348, featured battlements, arrow slits, and a massive iron-reinforced door at its base, a design so sturdy it withstood multiple sieges. During the War of the Eight Saints, Florentine troops repeatedly failed to breach it, proving that a clock tower could be as formidable as any fortress. Similarly, Prague's Old Town Hall clock tower housed an armory in its lower levels, stocked with crossbows and barrels of burning pitch to rain down on attackers. The message was clear: tamper with this town's timekeeper, and you'd face more than just angry merchants. Bells became weapons of psychological warfare. The distinctive tocsin rhythm, 3 rapid strikes, a pause, then 3 more, could rouse entire regions to arms. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe how the bells of Orleans rang this pattern for hours during the English siege, their relentless peals demoralizing attackers while emboldening defenders. In reverse, conquering armies often silenced captured towns' clocks, a symbolic act showing who now controlled time itself. When the Ottomans took Constantinople in 1453, one of their first acts was stopping the great horologian's hands, a brutal reminder that the city's rhythms now answered to new masters. Yet the tower's greatest military innovation was coordination. Before reliable timekeeping, mobilizing troops was chaotic. Archers might arrive at dawn while knights straggled in by midday. But with clock towers setting the tempo, garrisons could synchronize movements with unprecedented precision. Records from the Burgundian Wars show commanders timing cavalry charges to coincide with the 10th morning bell, ensuring infantry was already engaged when horsemen struck. Siege engineers even used clock mechanisms to calculate assault intervals, winding trebuchets to launch every 7 minutes, a cadence that shattered defenders' morale through sheer predictability. The legacy of these martial timekeepers lingers in modern military terms like 0 hour and H hour, echoes of when town clocks dictated the pace of battle. Every skyscraper observation deck and air traffic control tower owes a debt to those medieval sentinels that proved height plus precision equals power. The clock tower didn't just watch over markets and church squares, it stood guard over survival itself, turning measured moments into a matter of life and death. The faces of medieval clock towers were canvases where art and science collided, transforming cold machinery into vibrant storytellers. Far from simple timekeepers, these towers dazzled with intricate carvings of saints and sinners, zodiac wheels that tracked celestial movements, and whimsical automata that sprang to life with each chime. The Strasbourg clock, completed in 1354, didn't just tell time, it staged a daily morality play. As its gears turned, figures of death and the apostles paraded before onlookers, a stark reminder that even as hours passed, eternity loomed. Similarly, Prague's astronomical clock featured a skeletal figure nodding ominously beside a procession of saints, blending the sacred and macabre into a single, mesmerizing performance. These weren't just decorations, they were sermons in motion designed to awe and admonish in equal measure. Astronomy took center stage on many clock faces, turning them into working models of the cosmos. The Wells Cathedral clock, built around 1390, displayed not only hours but the moon's phases, a vital tool for farmers planning plantings and sailors anticipating tides. Venice's Torre dell'Orologio went further, its blue and gold face mapping the zodiac alongside the hours, a celestial dance that mirrored the city's reliance on star-guided navigation. For illiterate townsfolk, these visual cues were textbooks in metal and paint, teaching planetary movements and seasonal cycles without a single written word. The clock tower became a classroom where every glance upward offered a lesson in the universe's grand design. Local pride burst forth in the details. In Bern, Switzerland, the Zitloggers' animated bears paid homage to the city's emblem, while Lyon's clock featured mechanical roosters crowing in tribute to France's Gallic heritage. These touches weren't vanity, they declared a town's identity to travelers and rivals alike. When the clock at Rostock St. Mary's Church unveiled its procession of princes in 1472, it wasn't just telling time, it was broadcasting the region's political alliances through meticulously crafted figurines. Even the choice of materials spoke volumes. Gilded hands in wealthy trading hubs like Bruges, sturdy iron in militaristic Nuremberg. Beneath the beauty lay cunning psychology. The vivid scenes and moving figures ensured townspeople didn't just hear the time, they gathered to witness it, reinforcing communal bonds. Market days often coincided with clock performances, drawing crowds that boosted commerce. In Lübeck, the Dance of Death automaton at St. Mary's became such a tourist attraction that innkeepers petitioned to extend its hourly show during festivals. These towers mastered the art of holding attention centuries before the concept of engagement existed, proving that even in the Middle Ages, the best way to spread an idea was to wrap it in spectacle. Yet the grandest clocks carried subtle warnings. Many featured vanitas motifs, hourglasses, wilting flowers, or skulls, reminders of time's relentless march. The message was clear: marvel at human ingenuity, but never forget life's brevity. This duality, celebrating progress while honoring tradition, blending joy with solemnity, made clock towers more than machines. They became the beating heart of medieval towns, where every tick whispered a story, every chime sang a lesson, and every carved figure invited the world to pause, look up, and remember. Not every medieval citizen bowed willingly to the clock tower's authority. For many peasants and laborers, those relentless chimes weren't progress, they were chains, forcing lives into rigid grids set by merchants and magistrates. In the textile workshops of 14th century Flanders, whispers of rebellion grew louder with each docking of wages for late arrivals. Workers who had once measured their days by the sun's warmth on their backs now found themselves punished for lingering too long over a morning meal or pausing to tend a sick child. The clock's tyranny sparked fury in unexpected ways, like the night in 1382, when angry fullers in York smuggled sacks of wet wool up the town clock tower, stuffing its gears until the mechanism groaned to a halt. For weeks afterward, the square fell blessedly silent, and workers reclaimed the old rhythms of dawn to dusk labor, until the bishop's engineers pried out the sodden mess and restored the ticking order. Some revolts turned violent. In the Alpine town of Schaffhausen, miners burned the wooden clock tower to the ground in 1415, shouting that no iron devil would dictate when their shifts ended underground. The town council responded by rebuilding in stone and hanging the ringleaders from the new tower's scaffolding as a warning. Even monasteries weren't immune. At Cluny Abbey in France, novices sabotaged the water clock that regulated their prayer schedules, preferring the gentle unpredictability of the abbot's candle measurements. Their punishment: copying psalms by the very clock they'd tried to silence. The deepest resentment festered in rural areas where farmers saw clocks as urban arrogance. A peasant revolt near Strasbourg in 1494 targeted not the castle or tax offices, but the clock tower, its face smashed with scythes, its weights thrown into the river. "You can't yoke the seasons to a gear," their leader famously declared before execution. folk songs from the era reveal the undercurrent of resistance, with lyrics comparing clockmakers to sorcerers who'd stolen time from God's hands. In Bavaria, clandestine midnight raids became so common that some towns posted armed guards around their towers, treating them as precious as treasury vaults. Yet the most fascinating rebellions were the quiet ones. In coastal Brittany, fishermen clung to tide charts instead of clocks, while Italian silk weavers developed secret hand signals to coordinate breaks behind their masters' backs. Some communities practiced passive resistance, like the English village that accidentally let its tower clock run slow for decades, giving laborers extra minutes of daylight. These acts weren't just defiance, they were a reclamation of time's humanity, proof that even in the shadow of the clock tower, people found ways to bend when they couldn't break the rules. The struggle between mechanical time and human rhythm wasn't just medieval, it was the first skirmish in a war we're still fighting today. Every time we silence notifications to watch a sunset or ignore alarms for 5 more minutes of sleep. In the shadow of the medieval clock tower, justice underwent a quiet revolution, one that would redefine fairness itself. Before mechanical timekeeping, court proceedings moved at the erratic pace of human judgment. Trials might stretch from sunrise until hunger prevailed, as one 13th century scribe noted, with verdicts swaying as much by the judge's empty stomach as by evidence. But as clock towers rose, so did a radical idea that the law itself could be bound to precise, impartial intervals. Suddenly, a contract's due date wasn't by next harvest, but before the 9th bell on the feast of St. Michael. Witnesses swore oaths within the hour of prime, and debtors faced penalties calculated not in moons but in minutes. This wasn't just efficiency, it was the birth of legal predictability, where time became the great equalizer between powerful and poor. The transformation reshaped courtroom rituals. In London's Guildhall, the position of the sun through stained glass once dictated when sessions began. By 1420, bailiffs used the newly installed clock to swear jurors in at 9 sharp, with latecomers fined or imprisoned. Strasbourg's town records reveal how the clock tower's chimes settled disputes over alibis. An accused man's claim he was praying at matins could now be disproven if witnesses placed him elsewhere at the exact hour the bells rang. Even punishments adapted. The stocks, once a daylight affair, now operated on strict schedules. A baker convicted of selling underweight loaves might endure public shame from 10 until noon, his ordeal ending not when the crowd tired but when the clock decreed. Contracts bore the most striking changes. Medieval merchants had long relied on vague terms like payment upon safe return. Now, loan documents from Bruges and Venice bristled with phrases like 30 days from the striking of the 6th bell, enforceable by law. The Riccardi banking family's ledgers show loans to English kings calculated to the hour interest, accruing not by seasons but by the relentless tick of London's towers. This precision birthed unforeseen complexities. A 1481 lawsuit in Florence turned on whether dusk in a wool contract meant the ringing of the Ave Maria bell or the literal sunset, a debate that filled parchments with arguments from astronomers and clockmakers. Curfew laws revealed the clock's dual edge as both protector and enforcer. In Paris, the couvre-feu bell had once signaled nightfall approximately. With mechanical clocks, the margin for error vanished. By 1390, being caught outside after the 9th chime meant automatic imprisonment, no excuses accepted. But the same precision that punished also protected. In plague-stricken Milan, the clock tower's hourly bells coordinated the opening of sealed quarantine districts, allowing doctors and food carts brief, timed access that saved thousands. The clock tower's legacy in law endures in every modern courtroom gavel strike, every lease's expiration date, every statute of limitations. It taught humanity that justice delayed isn't just denied, it's measurable. Those medieval gears didn't merely track hours, they forged the framework of a system where time itself could testify, judge, and when necessary, condemn. While knights and merchants adapted to the clock tower's rhythm, medieval women faced a quieter revolution, one that reshaped their days with invisible gears. For noblewomen, the chimes brought new constraints. Household accounts from 14th century France reveal strict schedules for spinning, weaving, and supervising servants, tasks once done at a leisurely pace now pinned to the hour. A countess's diary laments losing the freedom to pause her embroidery when light faded, forced instead to complete 12 lengths by the 6th bell, under her husband's newfound obsession with productivity. Even childbirth became timed. Midwives in Florence were fined for arriving after the designated labor bell, their ancient art now subject to mechanical precision. Working-class women felt the change differently. A milkmaid might still rise with the cock's crow, but her deliveries to market now had deadlines arrive too late, and the cheesemonger's stall would close like a trapdoor. In York's guild records, female brewers faced harsher penalties than men for selling ale past curfew, their livelihood squeezed between the clock's hands. Yet some turned timekeeping to their advantage. A savvy lacemaker in Bruges timed her walks to coincide with the noon bell, knowing merchants would be too distracted by the clock's spectacle to haggle over her prices. The clock tower's shadow stretched furthest over domestic life, where once stews simmered until tender and bread rose until ripe, now wives juggled hearth and hour. German housekeeping manuals from the 15th century prescribed exact times for salting meat, airing linens, even conjugal duties, all synchronized to the tower's toll. This regimentation came at a cost. Folk songs from the era whisper of women weeping as they knelt to scrub with the bell's curse, their work no longer measured by completion but by ceaseless repetition. Yet in convents, clocks became unlikely liberators. Abbesses like Hildegard of Bingen had long struggled to maintain prayer schedules across sprawling cloisters. With mechanical timekeepers, nuns could coordinate services across multiple buildings, their devotion unbroken by unreliable sundials. The clock tower's chime didn't just regulate their days, it amplified their collective voice, turning isolated prayers into synchronized hymns that resonated through stone corridors. The greatest irony lay in women's exclusion from the towers themselves. While men gathered in clockrooms to adjust mechanisms, women were often barred, their time managed but not mastered. A poignant fresco in Siena's town hall shows a mother pointing her daughter toward the tower's face, not its gears, teaching her to obey time rather than understand it. This division echoes today in how technologies are gendered, used by many but built by few. The medieval clock tower didn't just mark women's hours, it etched their roles in stone, one measured chime at a time. When Geoffrey Chaucer penned the Canterbury Tales in the late 14th century, he made time itself a silent character, not through sundials or hourglasses, but through the rhythmic chiming of clock towers. In The Miller's Tale, the adulterous Absalom waits for midnight strikes to sneak into Alison's window, only to be tricked into kissing her lover's rear instead. The joke lands because everyone knew the clock's authority. It was the unseen referee of human folly, the steady beat against which mischief unfolded. Chaucer wasn't just using the tower as a plot device, he was capturing its new role in the medieval imagination, an unblinking witness to human frailty. Folktales spun darker lessons from those same gears. In German villages, parents warned children about the Uhrmacherteufel, the clockmaker's devil, a spectral figure said to haunt towers, snatching those who wasted time. A Nuremberg legend told of a prideful clockmaker who boasted his creation could outpace God's design, only to be crushed by his own malfunctioning gears. These weren't just ghost stories, they were morality plays about the dangers of tampering with time's natural order. Even the tower's physical flaws fed myth. When the clock in Bern's Zitlog froze during a plague outbreak, locals whispered it was Death himself pausing the mechanism to claim more souls. The towers loomed largest in apocalyptic lore. Preachers pointed to their unstoppable motion as proof of Judgment Day's approach, while doomsday cults interpreted stuck hands or misaligned gears as celestial warnings. In one chilling French tale, the village of Béziers panicked when their clock struck 13 at midnight, a portent so dire the town burned it in the square. Such stories reveal a profound tension. The same technology that brought order also embodied humanity's helplessness against time's march, but not all legends were grim. Italian commedia dell'arte troupes staged comedies where lovers synchronized trysts by the tower's chime, turning mechanical precision into romantic farce. Swiss farmers told of a clock in Lucerne that miraculously sped up during harvest, granting extra daylight. These lighter tales celebrated the clock tower as a benevolent ally, proof that even in a measured world, magic could linger in the gaps between ticks. What united these stories, whether somber or whimsical, was their recognition of the clock tower as more than machinery. It had become a mirror reflecting society's hopes and fears about progress itself. Every folktale, every literary cameo whispered the same question: in mastering time, had humanity gained control or surrendered to something greater? The answer, like the tower's shadow, stretched long and uncertain across the medieval mind. Walk through any European city today, and you'll likely pass beneath the shadow of a medieval clock tower still ticking, still chiming, still orchestrating modern life just as it did 6 centuries ago. The Torre dell'Orologio in Venice keeps perfect time for smartphone-glancing tourists. Prague's astronomical clock draws crowds hourly with its mechanical apostles and skeletal reminder of mortality. These aren't museum pieces under glass, they're living machinery, their gears meshing with the rhythm of subway schedules and office lunch breaks. That's the astonishing truth. The same devices that once terrified peasants with their first taste of punctuality now share streets with electric scooters and Wi-Fi cafes. Their endurance isn't just a quirk of preservation. It's proof that medieval engineers solved a problem so fundamental, their solution never became obsolete. Consider the technical marvel of their longevity. The Wells Cathedral clock, installed around 1390, still runs on its original mechanism, a labyrinth of iron gears hand-forged by craftsmen who'd never seen a printing press. The secret, a over-engineering born of necessity. Medieval clockmakers used massive oak frames to absorb vibrations, bronze bearings resistant to corrosion, and stones weight so heavy they'd outlast empires. Modern restorers at Salisbury Cathedral discovered grease made from 14th century animal fat still clinging to gears, a testament to meticulous maintenance across generations. These towers weren't built for decades, but for millennia, their creators understanding that time itself is the ultimate test of quality. Yet their true legacy isn't just in surviving, but in shaping. Every wristwatch, every digital calendar, every time zone owes a debt to those first public clocks. The very concept of standard time began with medieval merchants comparing notes on tower chimes across cities. When railways needed synchronized schedules in the 19th century, they didn't invent a new system. They scaled up what clock towers had pioneered. Even our language bears their imprint. Phrases like "a clock" from "of the clock," "clockwise," and "against the clock" all sprouted from town squares where these machines first regimented daily life. Some towers evolved beyond timekeeping into cultural touchstones. Belgium's Bruges Belfry, after centuries of marking hours, became the repository for town charters, its clock mechanism literally guarding the community's freedoms. In Bern, the Zitlogger's 16th century edition of a puppet show transformed it from a timepiece into a theatrical landmark, proving these structures could adapt while retaining their core purpose. Others became rallying points during crises. When Nazi forces occupied Czech lands, locals risked their lives to protect Prague's astronomical clock from destruction, seeing it not as a machine but as the soul of their nation. Perhaps most remarkably, these towers challenge our assumptions about progress. In an age of planned obsolescence, where gadgets are outdated before they leave the box, medieval clock towers stand as counter-arguments. Their enduring relevance whispers that good design isn't about chasing novelty, but solving human needs so thoroughly that solutions transcend centuries. The next time you check your phone for the hour, remember, you're participating in a ritual older than the printing press, the steam engine, or the concept of nations. Those towering sentinels of the Middle Ages didn't just give us the time. They gave us time itself, structured and shared, as the invisible foundation of civilization. Today's world runs on digital precision. Your phone's lock screen flashes the time before you fully opened your eyes. Your oven beeps the hour on demand. Your car dashboard ticks off seconds without a sound. But something vital has vanished in this silent, seamless efficiency, the communal heartbeat of the clock tower. Those towering sentinels didn't just tell time, they broadcast it, their chimes weaving through streets and into homes, synchronizing the breath of an entire town. Now, timekeeping happens in pockets and palms, personal and private. We've gained convenience but lost connection, trading shared rhythms for solitary glances at screens. Think about the last time you checked the hour. Chances are you didn't hear bells echoing across the neighborhood or see strangers pausing mid-stride to glance up at a tower. Instead, you consulted a device that knows only your schedule, oblivious to the woman buying bread beside you or the children racing to school. The medieval clock tower was a great equalizer, its face visible to rich and poor, its chimes audible to merchant and maid alike. When it struck noon, everyone paused, if only for a second, united by that single, resonant moment. Modern timekeeping, for all its accuracy, has shattered that unity, fragmenting communities into isolated pods of personal schedules. There's a psychological cost to this shift. Studies show that ambient time cues like church bells or public clock chimes subtly reinforce social bonds, creating what psychologists call temporal solidarity. In medieval towns, the clock tower's toll was a collective reminder you weren't navigating the day alone. Its sound carried emotional weight, the celebratory peal of a wedding, the mournful knell of a funeral, events that the whole community experienced together. Compare that to today's silent, blinking digits, which offer no ceremony, no shared pause, just individualized alerts tailored to one person's agenda. The result, a world where time feels less like a shared river and more like a million separate streams, each flowing at its own speed. Yet the loss isn't just emotional, it's practical. Public clocks served as waypoints in physical space, their faces acting as navigational landmarks. Visitors to medieval cities could orient themselves by the tower's position, while locals used its chimes to coordinate meetups long before "text me when you're close" existed. In Venice, the Torre dell'Orologio wasn't just a clock. It was the literal center of the city's spatial and temporal identity. Today's GPS pins and push notifications can't replicate that tangible sense of place. A smartphone tells you when to leave, but it doesn't root you in the rhythm of your surroundings. Some communities are pushing back, reclaiming the spirit of public time. In Prague, tourists still gather beneath the astronomical clock's hourly show, not just to check the time but to share the spectacle. Swiss towns maintain their tradition of Zeitlerkenturm competitions, where villages vie to keep their historic clocks most accurately tuned. Even digital innovators are experimenting with hybrid solutions, apps that sync local events to virtual chimes, or smart city projects that broadcast sunset alerts through public speakers. These efforts hint at a hunger for what clock towers once provided, a reminder that time at its best is a chorus, not a solo. The challenge now isn't to abandon modern convenience, but to ask what we might revive from the old ways. Could apartment buildings adopt melodic chimes for shift workers returning at odd hours? Might parks install sundials paired with QR codes linking to community calendars? The clock tower's legacy isn't in its gears but in its lesson, that timekeeping, when done collectively, doesn't just measure moments, it creates them. The hands of those medieval towers didn't just point to numbers, they pointed to each other, and in doing so, they pointed us toward a richer way of living together. Time has not been kind to many medieval clock towers. Centuries of rain, war, and neglect have left some leaning like tired old men, their gears rusted to silence, their once proud faces weathered blank. In the Czech town of Olomouc, restorers discovered the 15th century astronomical clock's inner workings were being held together by nothing more than centuries of cobwebs and hope. Over in Belgium, the famous Bruges Belfry, an UNESCO World Heritage Site, required a 3-year intervention to stabilize its crumbling stones, with artisans painstakingly replacing each damaged block using tools and techniques unchanged since the Middle Ages. These aren't just repairs, they're rescue missions for machines that once defined human progress. What makes conservation so daunting is the fusion of skills required. Teams don't just need stonemasons, they need horologists who can decipher medieval gear ratios, carpenters fluent in long-forgotten joinery, and metallurgists capable of recreating alloys that haven't been smelted in 500 years. When restoring the Wells Cathedral clock, the world's oldest surviving mechanical timekeeper craftsman had to hand-forge replacement gears using 14th century methods, quenching red-hot iron in troughs of animal fat, just as the original makers did. The project's lead engineer described it as part archaeology, part watchmaking, part time travel. Funding these efforts is its own battle. Unlike castles or cathedrals, clock towers often fall between bureaucratic cracks, too mechanical for heritage architects, too architectural for technology museums. Local communities have stepped up in extraordinary ways. In the German town of Rostock, children collected over 50,000 bottle caps to fund the restoration of their beloved Marienkirche clock, while in Venice, cafe owners along the Piazza San Marco added a voluntary clock tower tax to espresso sales. These aren't just donations, they're declarations that these structures still matter. The stakes couldn't be higher. Every restored clock tower is a living classroom. When the Strasbourg astronomical clock was dismantled for repairs in 2014, researchers discovered previously unknown annotations scratched into its gears, medieval clockmakers' secret formulas for predicting eclipses. In Prague, cleaning the old town hall clock revealed a hidden gallery of saints painted behind its dial, unseen since the Hussite Wars. These towers aren't just telling time, they're still revealing history. Yet preservation isn't just about looking backward. Modern technology now aids ancient craftsmanship. Laser scans map crumbling towers down to the millimeter, while 3D printing replicates intricate carvings lost to erosion. In Switzerland, engineers developed a vibration-resistant alloy for the Bern Zitglocke's new hands, ensuring they'll last as long as the originals did. The goal isn't to freeze these marvels in amber, but to keep them ticking literally as working testaments to human ingenuity. The most inspiring efforts blend old and new. At the Torre dell'Orologio in Venice, visitors can now watch the restored mechanism through glass floors, its gears turning beneath their feet like a beating heart. In Salisbury, the cathedral clock's original 14th century weights still descend their shaft daily, but sensors now alert keepers before wear becomes critical. This isn't just conservation, it's conversation, a dialogue across centuries proving that the best way to honor these giants isn't to museumize them, but to let them keep doing what they were built to do. Mark time, gather communities, and remind us all that some creations are meant to outlast their creators. Every chime we save is a promise to the future that the machines that first taught us to measure time will never themselves be forgotten. Standing beneath a medieval clock tower today, you're not just a spectator, you're stepping into a living classroom where history still moves. Many of these ancient timekeepers remain fully operational, their gears turning as they have for centuries. In Prague, visitors crowd the old town square every hour to watch the astronomical clock's mechanical apostles parade past death, just as they did in 1410. The experience is more than a show. It's a chance to witness the same spectacle that once mesmerized merchants and monarchs. Guided tours often take you behind the face, where the original iron mechanisms groan and clatter, revealing the ingenuity of craftsmen who built without blueprints. At Salisbury Cathedral, you can even touch the 14th century weights that still power the world's oldest working clock, their rough stones worn smooth by the hands of countless keepers. For those who can't travel, technology bridges the gap. Virtual reconstructions like the Time Benders project let you explore Strasbourg's lost 14th century clock in stunning detail, its celestial gears rotating at your fingertips. Apps overlay augmented reality onto tower ruins, resurrecting their chimes and automata right on your phone screen. Universities and museums have digitized archival blueprints, allowing aspiring horologists to study medieval gear designs from home. The British Library's online collection even includes a 15th century clockmaker's rhyming repair manual, a rare glimpse into the minds of these unsung engineers. Some experiences go deeper. In Ghent, you can enroll in a workshop to assemble a miniature replica of the city's 1420 tower clock using traditional woodworking tools. Venice's Torre dell'Orologio offers night tours where you'll wind the mechanism by hand, feeling the resistance of centuries-old gears as they creak back to life. For the truly adventurous, Bern's Zitlog lets visitors climb inside the tower at dawn to help the keeper synchronize the clock's hands with the sunrise, a ritual unchanged since the Middle Ages. These aren't just tours, they're apprenticeships in timekeeping, connecting you directly to the rhythm of history. Smaller towns offer unexpected intimacy. In Wells, England, the cathedral clock's 14th century face still marks lunar phases with a rotating moon disk, and volunteers will teach you to read its celestial code. Czech village horologists host clock whispering sessions, demonstrating how to diagnose a tower's ailments by the sound of its escapement. Even silent towers have stories, like the one in Rouen, where a replica of the 16th century silver ball mechanism now tracks tides again after meticulous research revived its forgotten function. The magic lies in the details. Run your fingers over the grooves in Prague's original oak gear frames, worn by 6 centuries of motion. In Bruges, lean close to hear the belfry's bells tuned to the same pitch as in 1382, their harmonies unchanged by time. Or stand in York's shadowed tower stairwell, where medieval clockkeepers carved personal marks into the walls, a graffiti diary of their battles against gravity and rust. These structures don't just tell time, they invite you to become part of their ongoing story, one where the past never really stops ticking. The medieval clock tower didn't just measure hours, it reshaped humanity's relationship with time itself, leaving fingerprints on our lives that linger centuries later. Every time you glance at your wristwatch or sync your calendar across devices, you're channeling a revolution that began when those first mechanical gears groaned to life above European squares. The modern world's obsession with punctuality, the very concept of a workday, even the grid-like layouts of our cities, all owe their existence to these stone sentinels that dared to slice the infinite flow of moments into manageable portions. Consider something as simple as a lunch break. Before clock towers, meals happened when hunger struck or tasks paused. Today, offices worldwide synchronize their midday respite with eerie uniformity, a legacy of 14th century textile guilds enforcing dinner bells to maximize productivity. Our smartphones buzz with reminders that echo the clock tower's chimes, herding us through schedules with the same authority that once governed medieval markets. Even urban design carries its imprint. Skyscrapers cluster in downtown cores just as shops huddled near town squares, both landscapes shaped by the need to stay within earshot of time's command. Yet the clock tower's deepest impact was psychological. It taught us to see time as something external, a river we could dam and divert rather than simply float upon. This mental shift birthed everything from railway timetables to stock market openings, from school bells to television schedules. The ticking that once terrified peasants now pulses in our subconscious, pushing us to make every second count in ways our ancestors would find bewildering. Silicon Valley's productivity hacks and hustle culture are just secular sermons preached in the cathedral the clock tower built. But amidst our digital efficiency, something vital has faded, the communal rhythm those towers created. Unlike today's isolated notifications, their chimes were shared experiences, binding townspeople together in synchronized moments. When Prague's astronomical clock strikes noon and tourists still gather to watch its skeletal figure nod, they're participating in a ritual older than the printing press, a fleeting connection to when time was a collective journey rather than a solo race. Perhaps that's the clock tower's final lesson, that progress shouldn't mean losing the harmony that once made the march of hours feel less like a burden and more like a dance we all learned together. As you walk past an old tower's shadow or set your next alarm, remember those medieval gears didn't just track time. They taught us how to live within it for better or worse, and their legacy ticks on in every structured moment of our lives. The true measure of their genius isn't in the minutes they counted, but in the world they helped build, one where time, once wild and untamed, became a force we could harness, share, and occasionally, if we're wise, still pause to appreciate.